welcome to the ILiA Creative Writer Support Pod. I'm Bett Bollhoefer. I'm so excited. This is the first one of the year, and we're doing the macro and micro practices of writing. We have a special guest, Michael McElhenie. And he's going to be leading, but this is a group discussion, so I'm hoping to get everyone's feedback. And if you're watching this sometime in the future, please feel free to put your ideas in the show notes. All right, let's go, Michael.
Cool. Well, folks, I really am looking forward to this conversation. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a little bit. I'll tell you honestly, I didn't call myself a writer until relatively recently. And I think I didn't call myself a writer because of how painful the process of writing was. It was very, very difficult. I've been doing it for pretty much my entire career, but in a serious way, when Dan Goleman began putting together his notes for what eventually became the very, very first emotional intelligence book, I was a member of the Hay Group team that owned the rights to a number of the aspects of IP, intellectual property, that Dan Goleman was generating. And myself and another researcher by the name of Fabio Sala were invited to ghostwrite some of the science around emotional intelligence that eventually went into the book. And I kept my relationship with that particular emotional intelligence team that grew to include Richard Boyatzis and Annie McKee and Francis Johnson when subsequent books began to be introduced, things like Primal Leadership and Resonant Leadership and the Resonant Leader Field Book. But again, I stayed in the territory of emotional intelligence. And then I was asked by Annie McKee to help her write a book on happiness, and again, was kind of in the behind the scenes ghostwriting. And I said to myself, I don't want this to be as painful as it once was. And at that same time, I started to lean into all sorts of different practices, uh, not just the macro practices that I use, things like yoga and meditation, but something called micro practices. And it wasn't until that domain opened up for me that I found an avenue to add these practices to my process of writing. And almost instantaneously with that decision, my practices transformed my writing. They became instantly less painful. And I found myself in the moment when I realized that, after a couple of weeks of putting out some really great content, I was overwhelmed with gratitude, saying, wow, I've had several weeks of writing and nothing about it felt painful. There was no procrastination. There was no excessive self-criticism. It was just smooth and easy. I'm almost feeling some of the feelings I felt at that time. Right now, it's just, I was relieved, because I always felt somewhere in the process that I would achieve some different state of being in relationship to writing. And it wasn't coming for the longest time. And it wasn't until these practices got applied to the act of writing that I actually felt the ease of it. And I write every day in my current reality, and it's never changed. And so I, am in a situation still where I feel like I need to pinch myself, wake up from this wonderful dream of finding writing so easy. Not easy in terms of, there's difficult things. There's really searching for a particular phrase or not finding the right structure and all that kind of stuff that happens. It's a wrestling match still, but it's not a wrestling match that I ever feel like I'm losing. I always feel like there's progress that I'm making. So anyways, I wanted to have this conversation with a group of writers and never found an easy way to go to a writing workshop or anything like that. So when Bett suggested that I just have this conversation with our support pod, I was like, yes, please. I welcome this conversation. So I just want to pause right there and just invite anybody to comment on this. Am I an alien and have discovered something really bizarre, or have other people had an experience where all of a sudden the act of writing becomes easier, or easy even, frankly, for that matter?
No, I'm on the edge of my seat. What is it?
Yeah, I want to echo that. It's very exciting to hear this, and
Yeah.
um, I've I've recently I'm just reading. I find myself reading some of the real what's the word I want to use? Classics. Yes, in New Thought. There are some classics that I would have read in the '80s, and going back to those. And Gay Hendricks is one that I'm reading again, A Big Leap. He talks about your zone of genius and all that, and I haven't I know about it. I know, yeah, get into your zone of genius, but I had an aha this week that my zone of genius comes when I'm writing to present something. I'm doing a presentation, and that's when it flows for me. It just something happens, and especially when I'm getting slides, pictures for the slides, so the imagery is there. Suddenly there's a flow to that kind of writing that isn't there when I'm just sitting down to write. And so I think part of it is finding that way that it just sparks something in you. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about what you're doing, because it may
Sure.
help with that. I guess that's what I'd say.
And Jane, a question, if I will, is it because you are doing a presentation, or is it because the writing has a particular purpose? What do you think it might be that you're
Yeah.
discovering?
Yes, it's the presentation aspect of it. I mean, I'm a minister. I've done talks for 25 years, so that it's not unusual for me. But now I'm retired from the pulpit, but I'm teaching. And so when I'm creating something for my students that is going to help them understand something, and it's all on integral, topics. And so, I mean, it's so hard to take those kind of concepts and make them really understandable, or take them out of the realm of just scholarly writing. And when I get that, it's almost like if you're going to write a book, you figure out who's your ideal writer or your ideal reader, and you write to that reader. It's like, oh, I can't let that reader down because she's laying awake nights waiting for this book. And it has that same feel to it. So when I'm writing for my students, something in me shifts, and a pathway opens, and the writing is definitely on a different level.
Right, right. It's as if you're writing for a particular and specific category, person, right? Avatar, as some will use marketing speak to apply to writing, but there's a very specific audience that you're writing this for, and you find that helpful. Yeah. Wow. Cool. Cool. Yeah. Others?
So Michael, this is extremely interesting to me when you shared this just now. I have these moments, and I kind of feel like I'm tapping into something from the universe where something will just pour out of me. And other times I sit there and nothing's coming out and it's just dry. And so this is a really interesting question, because how can we make that consistent and operationalize it? That's what I want. So I'm hoping your practices I'm hoping you're going to share with us, and this is not going to be to subscribe to your, class. But yeah, it's like, how do we make that connection happen? Like, what are the steps? What are the process? What's the oming or meditation or so?
Yeah.
But I know what you're talking about. Like, I have that occasionally.
Yeah. What it reminds me of is what Hemingway said. He described writing as a freight train that he sometimes steps in front of and sometimes he doesn't, right? And at the same time, I guess if you write as well as Hemingway, you can leave it to chance. And at the same time, I'm not that good, nor am I that disciplined, nor can I generate as much. So I can't wait. So I want to be more intentional about, catching that wave or stepping in front of that freight train. Like I want to be there. And I guess that's a big part of what my practices have helped me do is set an intention and to lean on that intention and not to feel overly self-critical if my product of that intention doesn't match it 100%. I'm okay if it's 80%. I'm okay if it's 70%. As long as I've leaned into that intention and enacted some degree of productivity against that intention, right? It's kind of like not being wedded to the outcome, right? Just allowing what transpires to transpire and just feel good about that and walk away from the day and just like, okay, right, set an intention for tomorrow and then, do it again.
William's got his hand up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it William or Bill or what do you prefer?
Well, my tennis buddies call me Bill, but my spiritual friends call me William.
All right. Well, this is a spiritual community. You're William.
So I was just thinking, do I have any micro or macro practices? Because I've never actually thought of having a particular practice for writing. And so as I was just thinking about it, I kind of thought that my practice is what I just popped into my head was the bulldozer method of writing. And then you mentioned Hemingway and the freight train. And I thought a freight train going on, but a little bit different. The bulldozer way, which is how I generally approach writing, is that I simply sit down and generally I just have an idea or whatever, and I just start writing whatever. And a lot of times, it doesn't make any sense. But you just got to get something down on the paper.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that's crap, and you delete it, you erase it. But then the ideas start formulating, and then I just attempt to do brain dumps.
Yeah.
Essentially, because I've always thought that the real writing doesn't begin until you start with the second draft, when you start editing what you've already written, and then that's when the real writing actually occurs, because you have that structure that you can play with. And so I've used the bulldozer method of getting stuff done.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, that has been part of a lot of books on writing. This idea of just your brainstorm writing, just let it flow, just, brain in neutral, pen in gear, or fingers in gear, or whatever, depending on your method. I tried that many times and it never worked for me. Yeah, it never worked. And I'm not saying it's not a good technique, because, I imagine there's many personalities as are in the world. There are as many approaches to writing as there are in the world.
I'm happy to hear some new and better practices.
The
bulldozer method isn't, particularly easy.
Well, this is bringing up, I think, one of my most powerful practices, and it is a tiny little practice. I definitely call it a micro practice, and I'm not sure where this phrase comes from, because it's been attributed to many domains of practice and many different authors as well. But the phrase is master the entry point. And I'm looking above my computer because I have a Post-it up there that says master the entry point. And it's something that I learned from a Shaolin priest. Oh God, how long ago was it? I've got it written down here on one of my slides. It was a long time ago. It was maybe a decade ago. It's a gentleman by the name of Walter Georgia, and he's a Shaolin monk. And his whole thing was what he called micro commitments. And I, of course, when I first saw a video on featuring this gentleman, I was caught up in the word micro commitments. But one of the things that was inspired, it was just something he mentioned in passing when he was at he did a TED Talk. I'll see if I can find the link to his TED Talk. But when he talked about mastering the entry point, he wasn't talking about writing at all. He was talking about getting up the next morning and practicing. Whether that practicing is his primary martial art, wushu, or yoga. He mentioned those two. And I oftentimes find myself struggling to get myself down and doing yoga on a regular basis, much more than I had ever with writing. Because I think I've taken this idea of mastering the entry point, I brought that as a micro practice to my writing, and maybe that's it's kind of gotten consumed with the writing thing, and maybe it's more applicable elsewhere. But so I'll tell you what the practice is, and you'll understand why it's called master the entry point, is I'll write every day, and before I go to bed at night, I will set up my computer so that as soon as I turn it on and see all the screens, I have the central screen to be whatever I'm going to be writing in. And typically it's Google Doc. And I have the Google Doc set up there. It's a blank page, except for up at the top, I write a provocative question. And that provocative question is related to the topic I want to write about that day. And I'll typically write one provocative question on that blank page right there at the top. So when I wake up the next morning and I come in, because I like to write in the morning, it's when I'm most effective. I sit down at my computer, I pull up the screen, and there's the question. If it's still the most provocative question, I just get to work, because I want to answer that question. And I'll just start to write. Or I may pause and say, you know what? I have a bunch of thoughts in my mind. They're all jumbled. I'm going to pull up ChatGPT and I'll write the jumbled thoughts, and I'll ask ChatGPT to provide me a quick outline on those jumbled thoughts. And if I don't like that outline, I'll say, write me another one, write me another one, write me another one. And I'll ask for I'll ask like 10 times, to write outlines, and I'll look at all the outlines and which one's most intriguing to me. And then I'll take that outline, I'll paste it back in my document, and then I'll go to town, because sometimes my thoughts are jumbled. As a child, I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD, but I could have been, right? And so, when I'm feeling that degree of energy and overwhelm, I'll let that outline allow me to kind of structure my writing, and I'll just fill it in. And I find that so easy. That's part of the ease, right? Like once I'm started on that intriguing question, I will just go as far as I can take it. And then I get to the end and I kind of do a read through, and it's like, oh, how does that feel? I really ask myself that question first. How's it feel? Right? And most of the time the answer is, oh, I feel really good. Right? I really feel really good about what I wrote. But William, your point is well taken, is that I'll feel really good about that kind of free form. And then what I'll do is I'll go back and kind of do another, I call it, level 1 edit, where I just kind of like go through and do some basic editing, not worry too much about perfection or any idea of perfection. I just go through and kind of clean it up, and maybe I'll put some comments, for little side tracks I could take, or maybe, hey, a story could go here, little notes, and I do that most of the time, but other time I respond to my curiosity by just writing some more or making a story, right? Whatever. But if I'm not feeling it in the moment, I just want to work the document, or I'm at the end of an hour period and maybe I have a meeting coming up, I'll just write some notes about it. But again, with that same idea in mind, is like whatever notes I'm writing to myself, I try to make it as intriguing as possible. Because I'm a very curious person, and I know that when I can write something or an intriguing question, I know that I'll maintain that curiosity and dive into it. So that master the entry point, oh my God, I think that's huge. I think that's a big reason why I feel so good about the process, because it allows me to enter into the act without the blank page problem. And a lot of authors talk about the blank page problem, where they're staring at the blank page. Oh my God, if I had to stare at a blank page, I would be miserable. I just want to pause there and get your reaction to that practice.
I have so many questions.
Yeah.
Okay, Michael, can you give us an example of a question? And also, how do you come up with these questions? Do you write down a list of questions like on a Saturday afternoon, or do you like, how did this? Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'll give you one from this morning. Okay, so the intriguing question is, what do parents need to know to help their children differentiate between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation? That was my question that presented itself to me this morning. And so I had some thoughts, but I allowed myself to go to bed with those thoughts. Maybe some dreams were stimulated. I'm not sure. I don't usually remember my dreams on most nights, but I do remember getting up this morning excited to get downstairs, grab my coffee, and sit down and start freeform writing about it. In fact, what I did is actually I didn't write so much paragraphs. I actually built a little bit of an outline for it, a short one, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 lines of text. And then after I finished that outline, then I went back and started to go to town and write on it. And, I think the very first, I'll go back to my document just so I can share with you what it is. My very first piece was about how intrinsic motivation sustains excitement and desire across time. Too much extrinsic motivation makes it feel as if the goals that are set are not their own. And that's the direction I went with the top part of the outline.
Okay, and where do these questions come from? Do they just come up during the day, or like you go to a session, you hear a bunch of questions, or how does it happen?
Well, so again, I'll give you an example of that. So today I wrote about that differential between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. It brought up towards the tail end of that writing process, which I generated maybe 12, 14 pages approximately. As I was getting to the end of that, I asked myself, what's a good allegory story that I can create, or what story exists out there in the public domain that explicitly mentions intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation? Okay, so the first thing I will do tomorrow is I will begin to answer the question. Okay, let me see the question. I didn't go there. The question is, what story might be embedded in a story about, in what way might intrinsic and extrinsic motivation be also wrapped up in the concept of confidence? And by the way, just to tell you what I'm writing about, folks, is I'm writing for youth sports coaches and parents. I'm writing a piece on how to ensure that you're not projecting your own desires on your child. I'm not sure what to call this and whether it's going to be a book or just a long essay or an article. I've been asked to write an article. I'm not sure if this is the one. But it's all about, motivation, desire, and then of course parents taking responsibility for their own motivations, and again trying to protect kids from parents kind of projecting their motivations onto their kid. That's the whole big topic that I'm kind of exploring in a variety of different ways. And what I typically do when I'm asked to write an article is I'll write like 4 or 5 articles kind of in parallel, and then I'll kind of cross-pollinate or borrow from one and the other, and then decide on what I'm going to send them. And sometimes it's right on the money and sometimes it's not, but I have other things that I can go to if I need to switch gears. So yeah, I let the previous day's writing inform the next day, right? And so as you could see, when I was kind of reading that, I've got a few jumbled ideas on the top of a blank page. I don't know exactly what it is yet, but before I go to bed tonight, I'll have a thought as to what it'll be. And usually what I do is I actually unplug, I'll drop in, I'll do some yoga. I'll just allow myself to do something that is not, thinking about the subject. An incubation period is what some writers call it. I'll just let myself incubate more passively, but something will rise to the top, and then I'll allow that to inform the question. But it always is in the form of a question. I never just put statements, always a question. And I have to find the question intriguing. Sometimes, I'll intend to go to bed at 11 p.m., but I'll be still sitting at my computer reworking the question up to 11:30. I tend not to go beyond that. Because I'm 62, Jane, just to be clear. Like my bedtime is like 11 o'clock, maybe 11:30 if I'm pushed. Jane, you?
Yeah. So I just love this. Master the entry point. What a brilliant, idea that is, because if you don't master the entry point, you'll never get in. And so it's like, how do you get in? But what I love about it is coming up with this question at night, and then letting it marinate overnight. That is brilliant. I mean, I've never thought of doing that. I often will start with a question in the morning, or it'll have something to do with what I've dreamt about, or something like that, but I never thought of coming up with a question before going to bed and then seeing what happens from that. That's really powerful. And another thing I really love, I mean, ChatGPT, what a great way to use that to help organize those jumbled thoughts and then go from there. It's like you're not letting ChatGPT do the work. It's
No, because it lies.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And so it's just helping to, bring it all together so that it's a springboard to go from there. And one other thing I love is the whole idea that Anne Lamott has of a shitty first draft, being able to allow that. In fact, it's part of the writing process. It's like you're going to have a shitty first draft, and the fact that brilliant writers have shitty first drafts just inspires me more than you can ever know. Believe me. But to allow that, and to not, looking at that blank page and it's got to be perfection coming out, to really allow that beginning, and that can really lead to something that is so profound if we just allow that beginning to get in there. Master the entry point. Just fabulous stuff. Thank you for sharing this.
Welcome. One of the things that occurred to me as I was sharing with you the master the entry point strategy was that if it wasn't for even more smaller, even more micro practices, I'm not sure how well that would work. And what I mean by the smaller micro practices is when I do sit down and start to write, every once in a while, what'll come up is a bit of excessive self-criticism, where I'll go, oh, that is it. I've gotten to this place now where if my internal voice starts to become self-critical, I'll catch myself pretty quickly. And that's where the micro practices, the really tiny ones, very much serve me in the moment, where I will just stop what I'm doing. I'll move my hands away from the keyboard and I'll immediately drop into breath. Sometimes it's a very specific breath work practice. Like I might, if I'm feeling, I have different versions of self-criticism. One version of self-criticism is more of a, oh, you're just too tired. You didn't get enough sleep last night, right? You're not in the right mind to do this, right? It's that kind of like passive avoidant kind of self-criticism. If that particular one comes up, then I'll immediately go into what's called fire breathing. Rapid breathing in and out of my nose. And then it'll get my energy up, and I got, a new flood of like weirdly intake oxygen. And I don't even notice that my feelings have changed. What happens is my hands will just go back to the keyboard after doing, again, 30 seconds, maybe a minute. I don't think I do those practices any longer than a minute, but I find myself just getting back into it, meaning that internal voice just got replaced somehow, or I created a state shift in myself where it was incompatible with that act of self-criticism. If I'm feeling more of an angry self-criticism, then I'll slow my breath down, maybe do kind of a counting box breathing kind of technique with a hold. I like to do really long pauses at the end of my exhale, and that serves me really well. But again, I find the same thing is I just drop into breath for a little bit and then boom, I'm back. And occasionally I'll get up really kind of disturbed and bothered. Then I do something that, I don't do it very often. I do have something I can share with you. Here it is. I'll drop it into chat for anybody, but I'll explain what it is so you know what you're getting. Oops, that's not it. Let me delete that. That's not the one I wanted. Done.
Also, if you want to share your screen,
Yeah, I can
do
just
that too.
copy this one as well.
If you want me to share it, I can do that.
There it is. It's a Google Doc.
It says I need to request access. You might want to make it open.
Yeah, let me go to it and make it. Well, it's asking me to grant access.
Account.
Yeah, apologies for that. Well, let me just tell you what it is, and then I will ensure that it has open access. So what it is a visualization. And it's a visualization I crafted. So one of the roles that I play in the world is I've been a mental game coach, a psychologist to professional athletes my entire career. It's one of the many forms of psychology I practice. I'm a sports psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and an organizational psychologist. And visualization is a very important practice in any sport. Since COVID, I created with my business partner, Greg, a business that works on the same practices, but we do it for youth athletics. and as young as children of 6 years old, 8 years old, all the way up to 18. So we created this domain of practice for youth athletes across every single sport, although my primary sport is hockey. And one of the things that Greg and I learned is that we can bring very sophisticated practices to kids as young as 6, 7, and 8 years old. That there is no restrictions on what they're capable of learning. In fact, what we've learned about visualization practices is that if you can work with a young person to create they're creating their own visualization, putting their own language in it. When you can do that, they'll own that practice and it'll become part of them. They don't even need to memorize it. It becomes part of who they are, particularly if they experience it working for them. Right, calming them before a big game, or they're out on the field and they just you see them just kind of dropping. I'm imagining the game of soccer where they're not doing anything, but they're sitting there just by themselves and they're in their visualization. You can see them actually dropping into it. They just have a particular posture, and they'll do those practices. And if they find those practices that work for them, they'll keep doing them. You don't have to encourage them. They'll just keep going. And so visualization is a very powerful practice within the context of sports. I just one day said, hey, I wonder if this would be helpful in one of those circumstances where my mind was racing. It was a big jumble. Nothing seemed to be working. Now the breath work wasn't working. I said, oh, let me just craft right here a little visualization practice for writing. And oh my gosh, right? It just, I did it 2 or 3 times that particular day, and I was good to go. And I flowed right into the writing. I got about an hour and a half of activity, really productive activity. And I don't do it a lot. I would say maybe I find myself once or twice a quarter even doing this visualization practice. But when I really need it, it's hugely helpful. So that's what I'm trying to provide here.
Michael, you have built the excitement about seeing this visualization to a level 10. Now we really want to see
All
this
right.
very, very much. And it's very inspiring to hear that like kids as old as 6 can use these little micro practices and visualization. That's very exciting.
Yeah, they sure can. It was a kind of a mystery to me, this whole world of youth sports. I really didn't focus on it. I was working with people who've were graduated from college and top of their game. Yeah, I am now no longer surprised at the capabilities of young people to learn pretty much anything. I am having a hard time finding that particular document, but let me go ahead and see if I can find it. Thank you for bearing with me.
Can we take a question from Jane while you're working the settings? Or do you want to wait?
Yeah, I'm good. I found what I was looking for, and I am now granting everybody who asked for access. So you should all be able to pull that up right now.
All right, let's go to Jane.
Fabulous. Great. Well, so it's not so much a question, and forgive me for, keep on jumping in here, but you're just speaking my
Please.
language here. It's so exciting. There's a great book called Joy in the Classroom, and it's by first grade teacher. Now, it's not about sports, but she started having the children meditate right after lunch together, and they would be doing visualizations. And the book is so inspiring to show how children could really, they took to it like, duck to water, and the differences that it made in their creativity levels, their behaviors, everything. Their classroom just changed completely. The other teachers started hearing, what are you doing? What is this? And the parents were asking, what are you doing? And so this teacher that's what she does every year now. And so her book, I highly recommend it. It's very inspiring to see how children respond to that and how creative that, and it would, they had before and after pictures that the kids had done, kind of art they would do prior to learning how to meditate, and then after, it was just such, the whole universe opened up for these kids. So it really can work. It really can work. Yeah, exciting
That's
stuff.
phenomenal. That's phenomenal. Yeah, there's a couple things that very much influenced my my new firm working in youth athletics, and Courage to Teach was one of them. I got a lot out of that particular book in terms of helping us adults really create a wonderful learning environment for kids.
So Michael, I know that I just sent the request myself, and maybe Rashana also sent it after you went through. I know. And is it possible you could share on the screen for the people watching the recording?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Okay, I've just granted access to a couple more folks. Okay, and let's see. Okay. All right. Let me get back to Zoom. There we go. Now I've shared this particular script for visualization with my son. I'm writing a book with my son who's in his senior year at Boston University. And so that's why you see some of these timings here. It's but it is a step-by-step guide for him. That's what got me to refine this a bit here. But again, just like most visualizations, they have an internal element and they have an external element, like because you want to visualize the environment in which you're writing, but also paying attention to your internal environment. As you can see, for example, it's building in a lot of other micro practices within the context of the visualization. For example, I call affirmation a micro practice. You can even do things like this particular visualization has a grounding exercise built into it. Most of the time when people do visualizations, they don't necessarily have a grounding practice, but this one uses the body scan version of a grounding practice as part of it. You could even put breath work. The whole idea of micro practices, by the way, is micro practices tend to be inclusive of many different techniques in a single practice that lasts a very brief time, like 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes max, with say a visualization practice. Micro practices typically include, again, some combination of breath work, some type of visualization, imagery, and then something that acts directly on your thinking, like a gratitude practice, an affirmation practice, thought flipping, which is a cognitive behavioral practice. And if you haven't heard of micro practices, they're kind of becoming something bigger than they once were. They've been around for more than a decade. But during COVID, a colleague of mine started to experiment with these in healthcare settings, because in healthcare settings, doctors, nurses, all the professionals were experiencing incredibly high level of stress and burnout. And so Kerry, his name is Kerry Chernus. He's written a number of books on emotional intelligence. He's at Rutgers University. Kerry started to do work up where he is. I was working at the time with a hospital in Houston, Texas, and I got permission to go down there again, full gear and all that. It was back during COVID in the early stages. I think it was May, June, July is when we did this focused work, where we were just walking the halls and just seeing, by body language, who needed some support. And we say, hey, can we offer you a few practices? We gave them a little card we created that with a little, micro practice primer. I said, hey, if you just, if you don't have the time, great. But we would just be walking down the halls with people between rooms, and we'd be teaching them a breathwork practice, or maybe layering a couple more practices on top of it. So that's where this whole micro practice idea came from. And Carrie is the one, when I was kind of in a phone conversation with him, he brought up the idea of applying it to every aspect of life. And I thought, oh, I wonder if it will work in writing. So I got to give Carrie some credit for, kind of opening my mind beyond the healthcare context we were practicing. We were using micro practices within. Let's see. The step four part is really important. It's the envisioning the writing process. What I discovered by having the visualization include process is that as you're doing your work, as you see yourself from that observer perspective, is what's happening with this part of the visualization. You literally allow yourself to see yourself working, picture yourself staying engaged. It's hard to picture yourself staying engaged from within your eyes. So oftentimes when you're picturing yourself, you're seeing yourself from the outside. That little bit of objectification move really allows you to discipline yourself to process, because writing is a process. William, you were alluding to that earlier about, how you have a brainstorm process, kind of that, bulldozer process, and then you come back to it, right? And you have your editing, your first level edits, right? So, we know that, the writing is a process. And what I've discovered, if I imagine myself in a visualization going through various stages of the process, that as I'm transitioning from one stage of the process to the next, that's a smoother transition between those stages, because I've already visualized myself moving from one stage to the next, and that stays with you, stays with me. So I think that's a important part. And then the step 5, right? Visualizing your success. And then you're going through the visualization, then you want to you want to transfer the learning, you want to transfer the experience to your writing. Right? And so you're having a part of your visualization process where you follow myself all the way down to the exhale, put the fingers on the keyboard, and just let it happen. I don't even care what I type during that first little moments where my fingers hit the keyboard. So, I just type whatever occurs to me at that moment, but I'm in the act of writing. So I'm glad everybody has access to that now.
This is so exciting, Michael. I did not expect this much value tonight. This has been really good. Roshana, you're on mute.
Do you have more practices? Because I'd rather listen to you talk, but if not, I just wanted to make the comment that, like, I've made a lot of scripts for myself, affirmations, or what I call reminders, that I listen to on a walk or listen to first thing in the morning when I wake up, and that sort of thing. And that takes a long time because it has to be perfect, otherwise I won't listen to it. So it takes a long time. But I just found AI voices, and I've created a voice in my voice. And I tell it to talk very slowly and calmly. So I'm going to put this visualization thing into the AI voice and in my voice, and have it do that for me.
I love that.
I love that.
I have a short little primer on micro practices. It's been written for kids as well, and so it's and adults. I have adult versions of it as well. I am happy to send that to anybody. Do we have everybody's email addresses? Yes.
Yes, people
Okay.
have to sign up to come to this, so we do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll send it to Bett, and she'll just pass it on to everybody. But yeah, it's a short primer, maybe 4 or 5 pages, I think. It was it's part of a draft of a larger body of work that I'm doing with Carrie on micro practices. So I'm happy to share that. We've been passing it around like candy.
Well, you just also gave me an idea, and that is making these micro recordings, because I usually take a long time and make a 20-minute or a 30-minute recording so I can listen to it through my whole walk or whatever. But now I'm thinking, well, why? Why not just make a 5-minute recording and go through this for writing, and make a 5-minute recording for playing music and a 5-minute recording for, I don't know, cooking or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you that one of my influences happens to be the martial arts in Zen. And one of the things that I started to lean into that led me to these micro practices more often in my own practices. I still do macro practices. I still sit and meditate periodically, not very often. I do yoga on a regular basis. I consider those macro practices. I do my walks, right, where I do, 4 or 5 mile walks. But one of the things that I appreciate about micro practices is that they don't take me away from the moment, from the present moment. They actually allow me
Right.
to be immersed in the present moment more fully. Sometimes when I'm engaged in a meditation practice, I am not necessarily, I know it's supposed to be I'm in the moment. Maybe it's just the way my brain's wired. I get distracted. I go other places. Doesn't matter what my mantra is. Sometimes I'm in the future, sometimes in the past. I find time dilations happen for me. It really gets
Mm.
really messy. So I find that if I do a micro practice, I'm more likely to stay in the present moment. And as I'm reminded
Mhm.
by so many of those sources that I mentioned in terms of practice, that if I can just allow the micro practice to serve me in whatever I'm experiencing, I find myself invited back to the present moment.
Mm.
Because my present moment oftentimes is not the practice, right? It's
Right.
what I want to be paying attention to, right? I have this little practice. After we're done, I'm going to go out and I'm going to spend some time with my son. And one of the micro practices I engage in is kind of a quick little breathwork exercise, setting an intention about how I want to be with my son. Well, it's a quick little
Mm.
micro practice, right? Setting up the future, the immediate future. And that little micro practice allows me to go out there and be fully present to him.
Yeah.
See where
Nice.
that's an example of what I mean about, yeah, it's a little practice and maybe take me away a little bit to the future, but it allows me to serve the present that's about to occur.
So,
Yeah.
Michael,
Nice.
I feel like you just barely scratched the surface of this micro practice, and it sounds like you've done it in amazing situations under fire and drills and, stressful situations. Is there any format where people can go and learn maybe even a 90-minute whole session on these micro practices where they could really get embodied, maybe in Boulder?
She's leading the witness. Yeah, so everybody, yes, we are having a conference in Boulder at the very beginning of April, and the entire conference is about embodiment. And we are kind of using the metaphor of a journey where we are going to pack our packs full of the practices that are necessary to carry us through 3 days of very intense learning. And some of the learning is going to push us right to our emotional edge. I'm very, very sure of that. And so micro practices are something that we want everybody to put 1 or 2 of those in their packs so that they have something that'll serve them in whatever moment may occur throughout that 3-day journey. So yeah, we're going to do a kind of a slow packing and unpacking of micro practices in our 3-day conference.
And
Nice.
before this meeting, I checked, we still have some early bird as of this recording. So if you want to know about that, go to www.ilianow.org to register. Well, that wraps our January, and just a few announcements. We don't have a support pod next Monday on the 20th. Please celebrate MLK Day with your family and friends and however you do that. And we'll be back in February. And if there's anyone who wants to present in February, please email me and I'll set you up. All right.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. Thank you,
Jane,
Michael. That was so
William,
great.
Shana,
Thank you
so
so
Thank you.
much.
Great
That
to be
That was
with you.
awesome.
fabulous. Just what I
Yeah,
needed.
That-
thanks.
Yeah.
Bye,
Blessings,
everybody.
Nice.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.